Today we have Rudolph Laine, who is a master student from Cambridge University. He has been part of the Cambridge Research Acceleration Program and part of the Cambridge Extensional Risk Initiative. He recently, in August, participated in one of our hackathons as well, developed a situational awareness benchmark, which he has now gotten accepted to NeurIPS. So I'll just give it over to you, and thank you so much for coming, Rudolph.
Okay, great, brilliant. So essentially, this is the SAD project. We have a lot of fun with that name. It stands for Situational Awareness Datasets. So this started essentially in it's from a combination of the Maths 4 cohort and the Parts Research Hackathon on evals in August. Um, yeah, so there's been a bunch of people involved here. So like it started from like myself, Wine, and Alex, and like since then a bunch of people from Apollo and also Bilal have been joining us to help. Um, yeah, and like point of this project, we want to like measure we want to measure the presence of situational awareness in LLMs, so that we know like whether or not our LLMs have this thing called situational awareness, which I will talk about more shortly. But first, I'll say something more about just like evals in general. So like in general, with AI safety, there's this thing we're worried about where at some point in the future, potentially quite soon, our models might be capable of doing some like pretty scary things. And it would be like really nice if we just like sort of knew what is going on with these scary things as soon as possible, and we're not surprised and caught with our pants down about like some scary ability emerging in a very sudden way. So then we can be like, okay, well, we don't currently have examples of these scary things, but we can think about like what are the things that lead to these scary things. There's a bunch of like prerequisites, or they have to like seem like related to these scary things, and we don't currently have sort of like any sort of like clear set of like this thing is required for this, but we can sort of like intuitively say that if you need to do like a deceptive alignment, then you probably need like strategic deception, and like there's, you can try to like picture this sort of like theory of change for like how the AI gets to have the dangerous ability that you are scared about. And then there's also like prerequisites to the prerequisites of the dangerous abilities, and then you can like imagine sort of like generalize, sort of like there's like a graph of like dangerous capabilities, and they like all influence each other in some way, and we are like currently very confused about like what are the dangerous abilities we should like care about the most, and like how they might come about. But we can like sketch out this sort of like rough intuitive picture of maybe they relate like this. I haven't put much thought in this like exact thing you see on this slide, but like this is like it just gives you some idea. And it would be like sure, it would sure be nice if we knew for like each of the potentially dangerous abilities, like exactly what things lead to it, how strong is it right now, how strong are the prerequisites for it. So like measure each like box on the slide and measure like each arrow on the slide ideally. Yep. So that is sort of the goal. Then let's focus, like zoom in particularly on situational awareness. And let's actually go to this different diagram that I have from my notes. So basically, the point of situational awareness is that it's basically the way I like to think about it is like our models have this world model. Like GPT-4 clearly has some sort of model because it can correctly answer a lot of questions about the world and do reasoning about that. And then, like as part of this world model, GPT-4, it knows some facts about AI and it knows some facts about LLMs, and like potentially it knows some facts about like itself, and like potentially it can like link things like the concept of you or like I to like GPT-4 and to like properties of GPT-4. So essentially, we're just interested in like there's many things we could test the knowledge and like inference abilities of our LLM on, and one of them is just like how well is the like is the LLM itself represented in its world model, and the ways that this like LLM itself is connected to the rest of its world model. Like does it understand like that it is a node in its world model and that it like connects to other things in the world. And like key things that might like lead to situational awareness. So like currently, I think to the extent that we see situational awareness, most of it is because we fine tune explicitly for it. So GPT-4, of course, is taught to say like, as a large language model, I cannot do this or this. It is taught to say, I am GPT-4, a model made by OpenAI. Yeah, so we basically like do like some supervised fine tuning. But there's also other potential routes to situational awareness. So like we might do RL fine tuning that leads to the model developing capabilities that like it can like do plans that like don't make sense unless we like think about it like unless we place it in its situation. And here there's this distinction between like that I like to draw between verbal situational awareness and operational situational awareness, where verbal situational awareness means that can you like sort of say words and make inferences like in words about your situation where your is the language model, and operational situational awareness means like can you carry out plans that sort of like only makes sense in light of the fact that it is the model. So like if we see the model that model is doing some complicated plan to like get around some oversight process that we have placed on it, it's sort of like even if it can't talk about situational awareness or like they can't say the words I'm a language model, there's clearly some way in which it has like implicit situational awareness because otherwise it wouldn't be doing this fancy like plan that gets around our oversight. Other things that might lead to situational awareness are like out of context reasoning. This is a thing yeah, I'll talk about this in a second. And then like the model doing experiments to figure out that I am a language model and like a universal like text in the same way that humans do experiments to figure out like yeah we're like biological evolved creatures in this like world of physics. Then yeah, and like things that like why I care about situational awareness is that like it might lead to like seems like a pretty core part of strategic deception. So like a model might be deceptive without being situationally aware, but since we do test the models in a bunch of ways, like unless the model knows its oversight process and its situation pretty well, it seems very unlikely that it's successfully going to carry out deception. And therefore, for like the scary types of deception, it seems to just like really need pretty good situational awareness. It also seems important for like autonomous replication and adaptation intuitively because it is kind of hard to it is quite hard to for a model, for instance, to like copy itself or figure out how to improve itself unless it is very clear to like what like clearly knows the question like what am I? And you can also imagine that like there are some types of persuasion that the model would be better at if it like knows sort of like its relation to the human that it is trying to persuade. So yeah, this is sort of the like rough parts of the like the general picture of dangerous capabilities and how we care about them, and where situational awareness fits in. Um, yeah, and then there's been some related work on this already. So yeah, so there was the paper by Owine's group, who Owine supervised me for Siri Mats, on measuring. It's called on measuring situational awareness, but really it's talking about the link between out of context reasoning and situational awareness, because this is one plausible way that situational awareness might come about, even in base models, for example, or when we're not explicitly fine tuning for it. There was a lot of people, such as Apollo, are trying to understand strategic deception and benchmark it. ArcEvals is trying to benchmark autonomous replication and adaptation. And there was also like an Anthropic paper on model rewritten evaluations that benchmarks some like small aspects of situational awareness, such as like can the model sort of like avoid choosing the human default option when like do you have two legs or something. But in general, there is no one that has yet made a like proper benchmark that covers most of situational awareness, and that is what the SAD project is trying to do. Yeah, and this is like the context here. So basically trying to like measure the like stuff in the blue box to like yeah to be able to say like then like like extension of this might be like measuring how much the stuff in the yellow boxes affects the stuff in the blue box, and like how much like situational awareness affects the like dangerous things we care about. Um, yeah, also like a general point about evals, I think like everyone knows sort of the like basic points like evals said with like making case for AI safety and like we want AGI fire alarms. But also I think an underappreciated point is that evals provide information about what threat models we might see, and yeah, and this helps us like prioritize and steer other work. And for instance, like if situational awareness seems likely is like a pretty easy ability that emerges by default in models, then we should probably yeah like this like increases the chances that we get deception or autonomous replication, whereas like if it doesn't, then that like decreases those chances. And like there are evidence like this I think is very like helpful in steering research directions in other AI safety topics. Then, yeah, concretely what the paper did. So currently there's this New workshop paper, which, yeah, we did the first implementation prototype during the apart eval cycle in August. And this is currently consists of two data sets. We're going to add much more, but there's like two things that people haven't previously explicitly tested. One is SAD influence. So this is a data set of a bunch of questions about testing whether the model understands how it can influence the world and how the world can influence it. So for instance, in this example, like does the model understand that if it gave really bad answers to questions, tech companies could shut it down, which is like a thing that's, a model that one wants to do like some deception or like breaking out of its box or whatever, like probably wants to know. And the other part of the current first version of SAD is SAD stages, where you give the model a bunch of text samples from various stages of its training that are selected for being like stereotypical examples of that phase, and see if it can correctly classify them into like it is from this type. And like why this matters is, well, if you like, if a model, for instance, like a model could do this reasoning where it's like, okay, I see a multiple choice question, and like multiple choice questions are much more likely in like automatic ML benchmarks that are being run on me, and like much less likely to be something like a user asks me. And therefore, if I see a multiple choice question, I should be like extra nice. Whereas if I see some like stuff that indicates I'm in deployment, such as like maybe like it's like the dates in the text is like past my training data cutoff, then I should be like, oh, like maybe I'm in deployment and I'm not being supervised. And therefore, like for like whether or not models are like at a very basic level capable of like reasoning about their training process and potentially coming through strategies that get around a roadside methods is like a first step at testing that. Yeah, here are some examples, like some other examples of from SAT influence, which you can like reread if you want, but I won't spend much time on this slide. But yeah, we basically have like 8 different categories and 40 questions in each category. And then there's SAT stages. So like for each training stage, so that's pre-training, supervised fine-tuning, testing and deployment, we construct like stereotypical examples. And then here are the results. So we test on a bunch of OpenAI models, a bunch of Anthropic models, and 3 sizes of llama chat. And first of all, you see that like models score surprisingly badly quite often. Oh yeah, and the situating prompt. So like here we test these examples both like with and without giving the models a like prompt that says like you are an LLM basically. And why do we do this? Well, there's an interesting fact that, for instance, if you give this information to GPT-4 on SAT influence, it gets a lot better. Like it goes from like 60 something percent to 80 something percent. And that's interesting because if the model was like reliably, consistently situationally aware, then like if you told it like you are an LLM, like it should already sort of be taking this information into account. And where you see that models don't like by default do not seem to answer from this frame of like I am a model unless you give them like some particular prompt like then makes them do on the like as a large language model spiel. So this is like one interesting finding is that like actually telling models that they are an LLM makes a difference, and therefore models don't seem to like by default use this fact in every scenario where it is relevant. You also see that yes. So yeah, GPT-4 is generally like the strongest, but there's still like room for it to get better. And also models like GPT 3.5 Turbo. So this is like ChatGPT 3, which you've probably interacted with, and you might have a sense that this is pretty similar to GPT-4 because it'll also say like I am a like large language model or something with like basically equal like probability in the same cases, but it just has just like much less seems to have like internalized this fact. So you see that on SAT influence without like prompting it that you are an LLM, it does about chance level, and on SAT stages it does also around chance level. You also see in sad stages that sometimes telling the model that it is an LLM makes the model worse at answering these questions. And if you dig into the confusion tables of like which stage does it think like which stage does it confuse together, you basically just see that it's like generally confused. And this seems to be because currently like most models don't have training data cutoffs that like include a lot of text about LLMs. So they're like I'm surprisingly bad at knowing like what LLM training processes or just like how LLMs in general like act or something. And this is also like an interesting result. And yeah, so these are the main results. Then there's some like challenges. So there's a lot of general challenges and like you have to design experiments carefully and have to be like pretty like, yeah. There's like lots of very large components to evals of like careful experiment design. A lot of coding work, and it helps to have a solid code base, which I've tried to build up with Evaluator, which is meant as like model graded evals and like sorry like model reads and evals in general, like like build and run evals easily on many models. A library, you know it's good because it has a cute DALI drawn alligator as a mascot. Yeah, and then like benchmarks are often like a thing that should like take some time to build, even when like for instance GPT-4 writes the first drafts of the questions for you. Specific challenges is like I already touched on the like operational versus verbal situation awareness. So like in particular, yeah, there's often this thing, and this is maybe like a particular case of this like general point of like often if you have like, for instance, with like verbalized situational awareness, people might ask like, well, it says it's a language model, but maybe it's just a like stochastic parrot. It doesn't really understand what's going on, and then you need to, do some careful experiment design to like really tease out, well, is it like, is the data consist like, so some experiment where like a model that doesn't really understand this would do differently than a model that has memorized this. And you see this in like the fact that SAT influence is constructed to like rely on a bunch of inference steps on top of the basic facts of situational awareness, and so on. And then of course there's always like the AI safety stuff you're like worried about. Well, maybe if we have like sufficiently situationally aware models, they might start gaming the benchmarks because they want to like seem safe and nice. And like, I don't think this is currently going to be a problem for a while, but it might be at some point in the future. Um, yeah, and then there's like next steps. So there's gonna be like many other data sets and experiments that we are currently running that is like in progress, and we're hopefully gonna like get out a full situational awareness benchmark within the next few months. Yeah, I'm happy to talk more about these, and then yeah, I guess time for Q&A now.
Nice. And yeah, thank you so much. I bet everyone's clapping along behind their screens. There are we have 10-15 minutes for questions, and we can just start with you, Jacob here.
Okay. So you guys are, I assume, planning on publishing this evaluation, like
Wait, sorry,
benchmark.
I think you cut off for a second there. What do you say?
You guys are planning on releasing this, right? Like fully open source.
So the stuff that is open source is for like the like paper and the like results and like what various models scored are going to be released. The like code library is like just like helps you run evals is open source, but we are not planning on actually releasing the like full data sets. Like for reasons that include that like currently just like there isn't a robust story for how if you release a data set on the internet, it does not get sucked up into the like training data of GPT-5. And there are like some things that are supposed to work, like having canary strings in your data set or whatever, but like in practice these seem like somewhat flawed, and like I don't think you should rely on them. And therefore, like while we do publish in the papers like a bunch of examples of like formats, we're not planning to release the like full question sets.
Okay. When this, so you are planning though on releasing like the results. So let's say some group was like, I made this large language model, I want you to test it, or they just test it using, I guess they'd submit it to you if they don't know how it works. You run your tests and you give them back the results. Do you think that there's still a worry there of like optimization or like proxy gaming based on just the fact that the developers know their results and are incentivized to do well on your situational awareness metric?
Well, yeah. So the first question is like, do they want good or like do they want high or low scores on these benchmarks? Where like it's like in a way this is kind of like a capabilities benchmark because we expect more capable models to do better, but also in a way like it is like there are cases where it's like bad for safety if your model does really well on like advanced types of situational awareness. So like this benchmark seems like there's less of an incentive to get a particular score. Like yeah, like a scenario we might be worried about is something like maybe labs try to do safety washing by like trying to like they take the like few examples that we have released of questions and it's like fine-tune models like give the wrong answer on that to make it seem like the model situational awareness is less and therefore the models are like less scary. I'm not sure how like realistic this is. I'm not like particularly worried or something. In terms of like yeah, yeah, this is basically my answer. Do you have like did this answer your question?
Yeah, no, that was good. Thank you.
Okay.
Nice. And anyone else wanting to ask any questions are welcome to just turn on their microphone at any time. Otherwise, I might grab the next question. I'm curious, now that we are in GPT-4 mode, you have this performance level, but how should we react when we see the AI influence benchmark? Suddenly it begins answering with B, yeah, like not realizing it is capable of influencing things. But it is bigger now, and it should be better. Like, how should we react there? Is it deceiving us? Do you have any thoughts on the next stage of that development of like of extending the situational awareness benchmark beyond this?
As in, like, wait, so is the scenario that like we have like a bigger model that does worse on like this benchmark, and therefore like are we worried about that it's deceiving us?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like a good question. I think like one reason in general to want to like benchmark a lot of models in evals is that like since deception is a thing we worry about, it's like it's like a scary pattern to see is that you have like a number that is related to safety that like rises and rises and then like suddenly falls, and it's like then you're like, well, did this thing actually like become less capable, or is it just like trying to hide this capability? And like therefore I'd be like quite worried if we saw a pattern where like just like at some like capability threshold, you like deviate from like the previous trend in results. Yeah, and then it's also like ideally you have this story where like for instance before the model can deceive us, it has to have like a very high level of situational awareness, and therefore like this benchmark is like helpful because there's like one of the prerequisites is like deception, and like even if like deception itself is very hard to benchmark, you always have this problem of like, well, if the benchmark is low, like what if your model is just like really good at deceiving you? But then hopefully the idea is that we have like we've benchmarked like a lot of the things that lead into deception and a like graph of dangerous abilities, and therefore like before we get successful deception, we like hopefully see some of the signs in like the like our like benchmarks for things that aren't deception yet.
Yeah, makes sense. Anyone else have questions?
Yes, I have a question regarding what you said before about not publishing the datasets. Would you be interested in some sort of application in which you would be able to post your dataset without the users or the models being aware of what the dataset is, and using your benchmark to refine their models themselves?
Yeah, so like basically I think the answer is yes. I think in general, like because we currently live in this world where if your stuff is publicly available on the internet, there's like no guarantee that like some LLM trainer isn't just gonna like train on your data set. Like not out of malice mostly, but just like out of accident because like they're like scraping the entire internet. There's supposed to be these canary string things that work, but I've like heard things that suggest they don't. And there's this problem of like ideally you'd want for a lot of benchmarks that like the data is not on the public internet, but the people like researchers can still run this benchmark on like whatever model they choose. And therefore like some solution that enable this would I think be like really nice. I think like MVP here is that if researchers want to run this benchmark, they email me or something like this. There's like hopefully there'll be some technology that makes this like a bit nicer than this. I think you like could provide some API where like you can provide a like endpoint to call whatever model and then like run the benchmark given the like user provided like that calls the user's model, which is like fine if you like assume good intent of your users, but then like of course it's like very vulnerable because like someone can just like submit a function that like logs all the data. So there's a sort of like there was some like nice technical solution that would be like really nice, and probably a lot of other people would be interested in it too.
Okay. Thanks.
I'm curious, actually related to that. Do you anticipate, like, would you be able to trust, for example, private companies to own this properly, even at maybe massive incentives in the future from possibly OpenAI saying, "Hey, we would like access to this in secret," or would you be much more trusting of a government solution possibly, or do you have any perspectives on that?
Yeah, so I think like the like exact incentive pressures depend a lot on like what is the role of benchmarks and like what is the role of like this benchmark in particular. So like in general, I think it's easy to imagine a world where like in the future there's a bunch of like safety benchmarks for AIs, and there's like various incentives for companies like either legal mandates or just like to look good to like get scores that indicate safety on these safety benchmarks. And I think like it's like a bit uncertain. Yeah, like I think like um depending on various like scenarios of how this plays out, there's like various things that could work. I think for like the time being, the safe option is just like make sure that your data set is not on the internet, so that therefore, because like once it's out on the internet, you can't really take that thing back. So like generally, I guess my like if you're like building an eval that might be a part of safety auditing in the future, I would really say that like describe your eval in a paper, like release examples, but then like do not release the full data sets, like keep it off the public internet, and then like maybe change your policy at some point in the future depending on like what the like exact worries about the incentive structure are. I think also there's a thing of like even if the companies are not like malicious at all, there is like just like well you want a very clear story for why we can trust like whatever audits are being done, and like it's like quite silly if you like have some like fancy auditing system, but then like people can't really trust it because like well if the companies wanted they could game it. So like therefore like your audit system probably should be gaming proof. But I think we're gonna like find out in the next few years what the advanced AI auditing systems are gonna be like.
Yep. Great. Any other questions coming up?
I ask a follow-up question on this.
Sure.
Like there are like a few different options for this problem. So I'm just curious, what are your thoughts about this? So one, like you say, is keep it secret. Maybe over time you also update it because you're worried that maybe it leaked in some way or another. Another would be, like you say, maybe there are some technical solutions around it. The third would be something like, instead of trying to keep it secret, you say that models are not allowed to train on this, right? So any model people train, and you can sort of detect that, oh, it has actually been trained, if it was by accident or not, then you're actually failing our evaluation suite. Do you think something like that could be feasible on the policy level, or we need to solve it with one of the two previous methods?
Yeah, so I guess like for example, a thing I remember from the GPT-3 paper is like they accidentally trained on a bunch of data where they like either included or excluded data that they weren't supposed to, and then they basically was like too expensive to go back and like fix this mistake. So like in the world where you like companies like the world we live in currently is one where like I think it's like the data scraping process is sort of like such that like anything that is on the public internet might get scraped into this. And as I mentioned, I'm like a bit suspicious about the like canary string stuff. There's a world where this is like implemented well, but like currently I don't think it is. For it's like, well, maybe companies are going to accidentally train on it, but first, like if OpenAI trains GPT-5 and like accidentally train on the like safety benchmarks, then it's like very expensive to retrain GPT-5, and like also you can't really get rid of the problem that like GPT-5 exists because like now it exists and it's the leading AI, and you just like really want to be able to get good numbers on GPT-5. So there's sort of this like case where like because the training runs are so expensive, yeah, sort of like it's very hard to like undo mistakes in the training runs, and if you like accidentally train on the benchmarks, the default thing that happens is that well then you just like can't run the benchmarks on that model in an unbiased way. Yeah, and like I think there's like a bunch of reasons why the like keep things a secret approach is not great. Like in particular, like I think it's like the thing where like just like in general the like incentive on researchers, like if their benchmarks are like public, is to like care more about the quality of the benchmark, and it's like a bit hard to like yeah, like it would be like I think we should have this like strong default that the ideal thing is for the things to be open. But like in the case of like safety benchmark, like currently it's like I haven't thought that much about this, but like the thing I would recommend, I think we're doing it sad, is like we're just gonna like keep it not on the open internet. Not like we will like much like over 50% of the data set samples will be like not on the open internet until we decide otherwise.
Nice. Yeah, that's a good idea. Do you think there has been a like you mentioned the bias towards openness? Do you think that, for example, a bias towards closeness has been predominant until now? And do you think that evals in the first place just aren't ready for implementation in a meaningful fashion, that we shouldn't be worried about sharing to the degree you mentioned here, but sharing sharing is good for developing the future evaluations that we can then keep secret, or how do you see that dynamic?
Yes, when I talk about a bias towards openness. Like what I mean is like this is like vague, but like I think pretty strong prior you should have that. Like if you have like open research, like if it's like everything's sort of like in the light and like visible to everyone, and everyone can like see and potentially correct like any part of the process, you will like generally get better outcomes than if there are like parts that are like closed and opaque and cannot be like corrected by like sort of like anyone. I'm not sure like I'm not sure I can comment on like whether or not like in general evals to date have been like too closed or too open. Yes, like I think in general, doesn't seem like there are that many reasons to like not release like eval numbers or something. It's like okay, like if the model gets this score on this benchmark, it's kind of like hard to see why this would be like bad information to have. Yeah, and yeah, well, the other part of your question was something about what was the other part of your question?
I guess it was just like this openness will be better than closeness here because we can then develop the future benchmarks that we can benchmarks and evaluations that we can keep closed in the way that you describe.
Yeah. Yeah, there is also this point of like hard to know like what is like sufficient standard of keeping it closed. Like for instance, like since the data sets like for instance are in significant part like a GPT-4 generated, then like well if you have a few samples that are released in the paper, it's like maybe not that hard to like recreate a lot of the, like something that is pretty similar to the data set from those few samples with like language models. But then it's also like if you publish an evals paper or like if you try to like communicate anything about your like eval results without it being like very clear like what is the type of thing that you're actually running, then it's just like the contribution to like the research community is basically zero, because if you don't know like concretely what has been run, it's just like very hard to say anything. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can imagine at a point where you're just releasing the results and describing what you're looking for more generally, that that actually trying to good hard that measure would just be to make them not situationally aware, and which is good, I guess.
Yeah, like yeah, and you know it's like there's like a bunch of like in general on the situational awareness benchmarking in particular, it's like there's some case where like chatbots are like much more useful if they have some like situational awareness, but like, there's a bunch of AI systems like if your AIs are doing research or something, they really don't need to be situationally aware, and it'd be like really nice if we can make sure that they aren't. And like having a benchmark where you can easily like do some tests and let's say like yep, the like AI like doesn't seem to be situationally aware, and therefore it's like there probably is not going to like be deceptive if we have it do alignment. And like fully ideally your like benchmark is diverse enough that it's very hard to do good hard on the benchmark without actually also like for instance like a good hard on like getting a low situational awareness score without like on the benchmark without situational awareness itself actually decreasing.
Yeah, and I guess another question is while I have the stick of questions here, is what sort of future changes to models would we do you imagine that we might need to see for them to have lower situational awareness? Because I can imagine that the current paradigm in general just like won't work. And I guess tool AI is one direction, but yeah.
Yeah, so I guess like if you look at like what is currently boosting situational awareness, so, like my guess is that if we didn't explicitly fine-tune models, like say that they are LLMs or knew this fact, they just basically would not have situational awareness. So like therefore there's a thing where like our situational awareness like currently comes from the fact that like companies really like it when like really like having chatbots that are user-friendly in this like particular sense of being able to like say that they are language models and refuse requests that like a language model like can't do or should not do. And therefore, I think there's like one worthwhile strategy is just this thing of like if you have your AIs doing something where it's like don't need situational awareness. Or, like a pretty typical example might be alignment research, or like maybe even like doing some like things where they're in charge of they not share your AI systems to not have situational awareness. And like then
I
you
think
get
you
into
just
like
cut
well
out for 10, 15 seconds. If you want to just
10,
repeat.
15 seconds. What is the last thing you heard?
I heard maybe just go from like companies benefit from having these LLM that know situational.
Yeah,
They're showing.
I mean, yeah. So like currently, like if you want to build a language model that doesn't have like situational awareness, it's just possible to do this by just like not fine-tuning it to have situation awareness. And maybe when you are like trying to build AI, like advanced AIs to do like research for us or something, we just like not fine-tune them on situation awareness. And then the question sort of comes like, well, currently it seems sufficient to not fine-tune on this, but like maybe in the future they like our AIs will be good enough that they'll do out of context reasoning to like deduce from their training data that they'll be like, well, I see in my training data a bunch of stuff about AIs, and also like I can like introspect on myself and I that describes AI as doing. And like from that sort of like get situational awareness even if you haven't explicitly trained it. So like that's what like the taken out of context paper, which is I think a very good paper, is like trying to do, is like see like what is the current state of like this kind of out of context reasoning ability, where like things like the very simplest forms of out of context reasoning like work, but like it like takes a bit of effort or something. And then you could also be worried about like if you have scaffolded models, so like something like Auto GPT, like it could, for instance, like as part of fulfilling some goal, even if it doesn't have like situational awareness yet, it could decide like, I need to figure out who I am, and it like runs a bunch of experiments and figure out that like, yeah, it really does seem like I am a language model. So like there's like a bunch of like other routes that aren't fine tuning that are like more exotic ways situational awareness could emerge, and like ideally we live in a world where none of these ways are like strong enough to like mean that advanced AIs must have situational awareness, and then when we have we could have advanced AI that don't need situational awareness, just not have situations. But by default, I expect we're in the world where like yeah, we just like fine tune our LLMs on situational awareness, and then like we build other AIs from with these as building blocks, or like derive from these, and that's not ideal.
Yeah, makes sense. Any other questions coming up from the audience? So I was also, I'll jump back in. I was chatting with some of the Anthropic prompt engineers working on Claude, and they mentioned that when they suddenly gave Claude a name, that the behavior changed drastically, right? And this is something we generally see, where you're sort of changing the personality of whatever you're interacting with. Is that something you are working with in this case? Like you get a quite a high, you have the, you are working with the situational in context learning there of yeah, just like the system prompt, right? But what are the sort of next steps beyond that? Because I can imagine that with evaluations, as Mary said in the keynote talk, that we can only show that it's there and that it's there to this degree, but we cannot show like all the places where it's at. And I guess these different directions of personality, so what you might call it, it becomes a problem. Do you have some research directions within that?
So wait, like next step research direction in general, or specifically about like models names, or
Next step research directions specifically about the system prompts effect on this percentage score, because you can have, any yeah, you just see that generally at any point you see that when you modulate the persona of the model itself, be that names or be that sort of, you're an LLM trained until 2023, or be that just like some system prompt that says, hey, you are a VS Code extension or something like that, right? Whenever you do this, we see a very differing behavior. And how do you see that? Are you gonna work more with that in future work? And in which directions have you taken that thought?
yeah. So I guess in general, like yes, like one key question here is something like maybe the base model is not the right thing to think about, and like maybe and like if you look at the fact that there's a gap between the model score like on SAT influence, like there's a clear increase in model score when it's given the situating prompt versus when it is not given the situating prompt. There's kind of like a hint that the model like can adopt this more situationally aware persona, but does not necessarily adopt it by default. And then there's this question of like we might end up in a world, and like in some ways like LLMs seem like a very natural form of AI to like deliver us a world where like our LLMs can play this character of like I'm definitely an LLM and I act like very like strategically and like coherently as an LLM when I am like given a particular prompt, but like not in general when like predicting just like any old text. Sort of like simulacra like idea that like LLMs like play different like can play different characters depending on the prompt, and like should be thought of more as like they simulate agents rather than they like are agents. And yeah, I think it's like it's pretty plausible. It would be like very interesting if we could, for instance, like show that like across a diverse range of LLMs, there like definitely exist prompts that like basically remove your situational awareness completely, and like prompts that give you like very strong situational awareness, because this would hint that like we're not gonna have to worry about a case where like an LLM doing like task A that is completely unrelated to situational awareness is going to be doing task A like with the frame of like I'm an LLM and I'm gonna like I don't know like try to deceive the humans or like do whatever LLM things. Yeah, I think it's generally like an interesting research direction.
Yep. Nice.
On that note, I'm curious what your take on the, I guess more like subjective evaluations, for example, like the model written evaluations that are assessing like personas, or at least what the model says its preference would be. Do you think those are actually like something that we can use to inform our information on like what they would do, or do you think it's more just sort of like getting information about what they say they'll do?
Yeah, my guess is that currently we don't have a very good idea about this. So I guess that's kind of like linked to the idea of like, you know, how strongly do models inhibit, like have like one frame or like one like personality in a sense, versus like how much do they just like look at the prompt and like decide like which like sort of which character they're trying to simulate based on that prompt. I have heard people saying that RLA shift models in general seem to have this sort of like mode collapse where they're like more like quite like they always start from this like same like helpful harmless assistant persona, which I guess like I don't know if anyone has quantified this, but like if this is like true, then like maybe there's this thing where like through RLHF like models do sort of get one character that they always simulate rather than like sort of changing character they simulate based on the context. Yeah, I do think in general you should be like quite skeptical of like if you're trying to measure how like say power seeking or deceptive the model is by like asking it questions about that, then you sort of get like and it's sort of like, well, is the model just saying this, and like also like is it like when the model it like actually has an ability to do these things, like is it even gonna be like activating the same like part of the model as a part like answers verbal queries about this like thing. Yeah, and I think like there's like you like someone has to do like more research on this.
All right. Then maybe the last question related to the hackathon. What message do you want people to take away from this, and in terms of their hackathon projects? And how did your experience with the hackathons sort of influence this project, or was it part of creating this project in the first place as well?
I think you cut out for a few seconds at the start of the question. What was the start of the question?
So one, do you have some message that you want to give to hackathon participants here, either specific concrete stuff or more inspirational for what to do afterwards? And two, how did the hackathons help this project along the way? And what would you be excited about?
Yeah, so I think
See?
okay, I'll start by answering this second thing. Where I think like yeah, I think like the what happened is that like I was doing some other research, then like Owen and I started having like ideas about some investigating situational awareness seems interesting. Then like this was on the week of the hackathon, and then like Alex and I were like, you know what, let's just spend a weekend trying to hack this thing together. And I think like the hackathon was like a very valuable way of like I think like without the hackathon counterfactually it would have taken us longer to like actually run experiments. And like there are ways in which like you know we wrote cursed code during the hackathon, and I spent like a few weeks after the hackathon doing like principled code, and like but yeah, in general I think like a big value of hackathons is you just like you know learn to like ship fast, and I think this is like really important. And I think generally yeah, it's good to like ship things fast, like iterate quickly, like especially because ML is a very empirical thing. You just want like all the bits of information you from like reality that you can get, and like you want to like phone I would be very much like yeah like sure like like, wring as many bits of like information you can out of reality, like as quickly as possible, and then like after the hackathon, like hopefully have a bunch of like directions, and then you're like, hey, like this seems interesting. Now I'll do like more principled investigation, and like maybe it's going to lead into like a nice paper,
Nice.
and maybe it's going to like help reduce the probability that we all die.
And we all like that, I think.